Hello, A pushers. All right, let me hide the presenter view so we can get at the urbane essays. So if you've written a 4 or a 5, this is why you're watching this presentation, to learn how to get to that 5 or 6. So the assumed skill set is already here. This is a set of skills from the video of students looking at how to get to a 4. If you're looking at your rubric, which you should, so the assumed skill set is go to part C and D. On the left-hand side of C and D, that is this. You've already learned how to do this. Now you're moving to the right side of part C and D, which is argument and sophistication. Okay, so if you've written a 4 and you're trying to move to a 5, or if you've written a 5 and you're thinking, I don't know how I got to a 5. I got to a 5. I guess I'm getting some things. But I couldn't necessarily tell you why I got it. You might want to stop here. You probably have a self-driven argument, and I put on here a few characteristics. So typically a 4 has topic sentences. It might briefly give a head nod to the thesis somewhere else in the paragraph, but it's not elaborated on a whole lot. If you've already written a 5, you have elaborated on your thesis multiple times. And what that means is, and I put on here number 2, it's more than just one paragraph. It's done throughout the paper. So it's not like you just have one great paragraph at the start. The third point, related to 1 and 2, I could get a highlighter, and I could highlight 3 or 4 spaces in your response where you are developing an argument. So if you're looking to move from a 4 to a 5, number 3 is crucial. 3 or 4 times in the paper, you've really got to elaborate on your argument. Number 4, the student controls the tenor of the response. It just means you control the tone of the response. You're molding the paragraphs how you want to, both in the order of the paragraphs and as well as the length. So how much are you elaborating on your thesis? If you're going to say, for instance, that one category is more important than the other one, then that paragraph ought to be more elaborate. That makes sense. You said that in your argument, and now you're developing that part of the argument. So we're going to read a 5, and you're going to try and highlight these things so you can actually see where are 3 or 4 spots where a student developed a thesis in an argument. So if you're just looking for a 5, you can stop now. If you're looking for a 6, here we go. There's the unicorn. Okay, so what does a 6 look like? Well, I've given you, 5 different ways to think about it, but each one has nuance to it. So the first one, the pole ends of the skill. So let's take causation. Causation has 2 ends, causes, consequences. Comparison has 2 ends, similarities, differences. Change and continuity, CCOT. One end says change, one end says continuity. So if you were to get a change question, and in your thesis, you both talk about changes and continuities, and then you do that throughout the paper, you are eligible for the unicorn point. Now the question is, how well did you address both of those? So it's a question of sophistication. Number 2, irony, contradiction, contingency. Those are just skills that aren't seen very often. So could you develop one or more of those? Could you show moments of irony and contradiction, and then get back to your argument? That's another way to think about this. Some people call it just the denial of the question. So the question asks you about change. You say, well, there's some change, but it's more continuity. Now you've privileged continuity, which the question didn't ask you, but it's an option for you. And so you can then develop that throughout the paper. A counter argument's another way to think about this, but here's what you don't want to do. Do not save that for the last paragraph. Don't think of that as your conclusion. That is both introduced in the thesis, and then you mention it a few times in the essay. And then there might be an elaborate take on it at the end. Across time and space is not synthesis. You're just thinking about it as, okay, if I'm given a topic on American Indian history in the 18th century, could I make some connections to the 19th century? Or let's say you got a Cold War question. Could you take a policy in the Cold War from the 1950s and compare it to the 1980s? That's across time and space. But similar to the counter argument, you don't want to just leave that for the last paragraph. That's going to require more applications throughout the paper. So again, this is all part of the argument. It's not found in one spot. You mention it in the argument, and then you repeat it throughout. So let's read a 6 and see where the student does this.